Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. I'm sorry to interrupt all these conversations, but we've got to get our meeting started because we are on an incredibly tight schedule this afternoon and tomorrow. And the incredibly tight schedule includes our opening conversation, who has to get back to a meeting roughly by 1:30, but knowing how quickly he walks or runs, that'll probably be better than getting in a car at this particular stage. So I'm Robert Niblett. I'm the director of Chatham House. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you at past fora. We've been running these forums since 2015, part of our Gender and Growth Initiative, which we set up back as one of the ideas of how we might be able to contribute to the gender inclusive growth agenda, and thinking that maybe focusing on the G20 in particular was a useful way of carrying out that exercise. And this is the first time we've held the Gender and Inclusive Growth Forum here at our building in Chatham House. So welcome to Chatham House. I know many of you have probably been here in the past, but it's great to have you here. And I'll say some few words about how this building doesn't look like it normally looks today in a second. You all know about the objectives of our own initiative, and therefore the forum, how we can offer research on economic problems that stem from gender inequality and what they're doing to the limits to growth in both developed and developing economies. I think we've seen some significant progress in recent years. We'll discuss this over the last couple of days, but when we think about it, there is still a very long way to go, as the ILO OECD report, which many of you will have read, noted before starting here. In particular, the gender gap in labour force participation and family leave seems to be improving, but in terms of segregation of occupation and the gender gap on pay, very little progress really made over these last few years, which is what makes this forum all the more important. I don't want to use up too much of my time setting up here, because each of the sessions today will have some element of the setup. I've just got to do a few practical things before eating even another 2 minutes into my conversation with Peter. First of all, please make sure your mobile phones are on silent. Do keep them on, because second point, this is not under the Chatham House rule, even though you're in Chatham House. I know people think this is a contradiction in terms, but it's not. Most of the meetings that we run from here in this room tend to be on the record, as this is, which means that this event is being live streamed. So we have an opportunity, I think, to reach out actively and in real time to a much larger audience. We have, as usual, some folks helping us with the social media. Danetta Campbell, I think, at the back. Elizabeth Eisel as well. Elizabeth Eisel is here. Tom Farah, my colleague, will be around somewhere as well. Please do get involved on the social media side as well. We have the hashtag listed up here, rather a long one, but once you used it once, hopefully your phone will remember it, CH Shaping the Future. You've got a forum agenda, which has got everything in there, including the bios, so I won't spend too long describing who's who, or nor will the other moderators. But if you have any questions as you go along, there's somebody always at the registration desk, and red lanyards. Anyone with a red lanyard is somebody from the Chatham House team who can help you. We've tried to allow plenty of time for discussion. These are conversational events that we'll be having up here. Do let people know who you are quickly and succinctly so we can get the most of your interventions. A very important point. We cannot lay on events such as this as a charitable non-profit, non-subsidized by the UK government or any other government, without financial support from a number of organizations. We're delighted that EY is our strategic supporter once again, and we have a number also of highly valued forum partners: McKinsey & Company, MasterCard, the Freedom Fund, and the Asia Foundation. Thank you to all of them. One extra big thank you. The Getty Images team, who've teamed up with Dove and Girl Gaze. There is a Show Us collection, which I think you will have seen already, which has rather transformed our main meeting hall or our main reception room upstairs from what you normally see around the walls of former speakers here at Chatham House, and also this whole corridor on the way in. A very different, I think, view of the way gender-inclusive stereotypes can be broken down, the topics that we will be discussing here, to try to make sure we make the most of all humans on this planet contributing to growth and inclusivity as we go along. So I have raced through that as fast as I can. I'm going to sneak at least 2 or 3 minutes off Peter at the end of this. We might not finish a quarter past, Peter, but I'll go as quickly as I can. I want to welcome back to Chatham House, though I think for the first time in this guise, to kick off this forum, Peter Hill. Peter is the Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, also very importantly the G20 and G7 sherpa. So the person trying to put together the declaration, which included, I think very importantly this year, 2 very important full paragraphs, 22 and 23, on the importance of gender inclusion in economic growth. And Peter, come on up to stage. I'll finish introducing you as you get here. Peter I knew before because he was also the Director of Strategy, which used to be called Director of Policy Planning at the Foreign Office, but somebody who has been working through this whole time while the rest of the UK has been obsessing about Brexit. Peter has been finding the time, amongst other things, in this PPS role, which means he has to do everything, I think, to make sure that the British voice was clearly represented and bringing out some of those key themes, which include, obviously, the gender-inclusive agenda onto the G20 forum. Peter, we've literally got 10 minutes of your time. You've got to get back for, it is a 1:30 meeting with the Prime Minister. So we will rattle through this. I'll ask you a couple of questions, and maybe if somebody gets one question in from the audience, we'll do that if we do. I think the most useful thing you could do for us as we kick off 36 hours, or at least a day and a half of this event, is tell us what context the push for greater gender inclusion in work opportunities, in all aspects of economic growth, what is the context in which it's happening? We're very excited here about the 2 paragraphs in the Osaka Declaration. They have a level of detail, specificity, even a sort of effort to reach out and get other countries to own up, or at least be more exposed to what they're doing in terms of achieving their targets. But this is not a neutral context in which this change is happening. Tell us something about how easy or difficult it was to get, not the whole declaration done, but importantly this one, and how it affects the gender inclusion agenda.
Yeah, so look, I mean, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but the context for all this is quite difficult, and the context for making the G20 as an organisation work and carry on producing declarations which, inch by inch, move the international agenda forward is not straightforward. The last G20 in Buenos Aires was quite difficult. Osaka equally was quite difficult, and I would say until the last few minutes of the meeting, we did not know whether we would have a communique text or not. And in fact, I think we delayed the last session and the press conference in order to try and give us time to get the thing over the line. And there are a couple of issues which are extremely contested internationally, for example, trade and climate change, where it is proving quite difficult to maintain an international consensus. There's some big power politics going on in all this, which I'm sure as followers of the international system you'll be well aware of, but it's just to say that it's not an easy context in which to be moving forward any particular agenda. So I often say to people, when they don't see quite the outcome they want on the issue that they're most concerned about, imperfect is still pretty good when you're operating in an environment where getting any outcome is not a mean feat. And on gender, I would just say on gender...
Does this extend over into the gender?
The good thing about gender, I think, is over the last few years you've seen this become pretty well accepted, although there are differences we can talk about, pretty well accepted as an important part of the G20 and the G7 agenda. So although there are differences in how countries are approaching the issues, I think it is now hardwired into the agendas of the G20 and the G7 that women's economic empowerment, labour inclusion, digital divide, all those issues are a theme and a preoccupation and a priority that must continue to be pushed. And although at each iteration you'll only see a small move forward, please don't underestimate how important that is or how hard won it is. And the fact that this is now part of the landscape, I think, for me anyway, is a significant factor, and I firmly expect it to be for presidencies in 2020. The UK will have its presidency of the G7 in 2021. I'm sure these things will not disappear off the agenda, so I think that is an achievement.
And when you said that obviously this is a political process and there's a group, certainly from a Chatham House perspective, trying to feed and use the G20 as a lever, where do you think some of those gaps or differences are, and what should this group be aware of as over the course of the next day and a half, and we've set aside time tomorrow afternoon to actually try to come up with a set of ideas and recommendations to share with the next G20 presidency and G7 presidency. What are some of the either friction areas that we need to be aware of so we're not simply putting forward ideas that then fall straight into that trap?
Yeah, so the area where everyone can agree we must focus is the economic dimension, because that is an argument you can make across the board and all countries get it. So I think focusing on that, provision of data is incredibly powerful. Now, some countries are allergic to the idea of monitoring and evaluation, so you have to be careful how you frame it. But the idea that you're going to get data out there which is available and demonstrates the gaps, the problems, the issues that need to be tackled is powerful. And I know we made a step forward with the accelerator at the last summit. Things just to have in mind. So as I say, monitoring and evaluation, you just have to be aware that some countries think that's not, it's a consensus organization, the G20, and some countries think it's not the role of the G20 to be sticking its nose too closely into their domestic affairs. So you've got to get the push and pull right of using what you're doing domestically in a G20 member and what you're doing at the international multilateral in a complementary way to try and inch the agenda forward. Don't push far enough and you won't get anything. Push too hard and you'll get a reaction. So it's a constant balancing act, I think, for those who are trying to move us forward. The things I think, apart from that, which I would look out for, so there was a bit of discussion about the very word gender at this G20 summit. So I think 5 to 10 years ago, the word gender was not contested really in any way. I think at this G20 summit, we had some countries saying they were less comfortable now with the word gender. They were happy talking about a balance of rights, a balance of access, a balance of opportunity between men and women. But the word gender was one they were a little uncomfortable with. And I'm sure you can imagine the sorts of countries we're talking about and the reasons they might be a bit less comfortable than they were in the past. So I think that is an area that in future we will have to keep an eye on. And as you probably know, anything surrounding sexual and reproductive health is always quite a contested area where it's quite hard to make progress at G20 and G7.
And on sort of segregation of occupation, there's this key area where all the data obviously shows that even across some of the most developed G20 countries, more males going onto the STEM side, more female on the caregiving social side. To what extent is overcoming that differentiation potentially caught up also in this differentiation? What is the role of the family? Is a family a nuclear family? Roles of men and women? Are we past that, or is that also getting roped into this at the moment, into the kind of liberal versus illiberal view of what effective societies are?
Well, I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that we are past it, but it's become quite difficult to make that argument very strongly in the multilateral context, because I think the idea that there is a massive economic loss from not including women fully and properly in the economy is an argument that very few people around the table contest. So I think underlying it, you can't deny that there are cultural and social and political issues, but the economic is one that is quite hard for people to argue against, and that's why it's probably, although all the other arguments are legitimate, and for a country like the United Kingdom they are very important, in a context like the G20, that sort of multilateral fora, the economic argument is the most powerful.
I'm going to ask Peter one more question, then give an opportunity if anyone gets their hands up quickly, because we've got about 3 minutes left. I'll take 1 or 2 questions which you can answer and then tie up. Peter, could you say something about what the UK in this context, around this space, was in particular bringing to the table, either from our own experience on the gender pay gap exercise, which we've undertaken here, which has been painful for quite a few organizations. What has Britain been trying to get out of this W20, G20 process? And what would you highlight as your priorities over the coming year in this area?
So I think the first thing a country like the UK can do is lead by example, because that is a powerful thing that G20 countries do look at each other and see what each other are doing. The G7, I'm sure the same will be the case. I think the French presidency are very focused on countries learning from each other and a sort of constructive, competitive idea they are trying to get going. So leading by example, whether that's on gender pay reporting, on shared parental leave, on on the work we published last week on a pathway to gender equality. So I think leading by example is important. I think if I think about our development activity and the way we prioritise women's economic empowerment and active gender equality in our aid programme, I think when you think about the weight that the UK aid programme has, both in terms of the very size of the programme, but also its leadership role internationally, I think that's quite a powerful factor in how other agencies think about their aid programmes in third countries. And then thirdly, we will work very hard with any presidency that we can who wants to move this forward to try and get these issues on the agenda and to support those who want to, where presidencies might not be so forward-leaning, cajole, encourage, whether that's round the sides, through NGOs, through other groups, just to keep the show on the road. So I think what we do domestically, what we do with our aid programme and what we do multilaterally, recognising this is a consensus organisation. The presidency must always be in the lead. It's not our job, as we say, to teach them to suck eggs, but it is our job to try and nudge the thing forward at every opportunity.
A question from the floor? There's a chance. Right, 2 hands went up. That's it. 1, 2. If you put a microphone here, and the microphone, the lady at the back there, with the red. Yeah. Why don't you go first, as you've got the microphone? Go ahead. Just very quickly, yep.
Thanks. I'm Carolyn Curry. I'm the Chief Exec of Women's Enterprise Scotland. My question's on data. You were talking about the policy progress that's been made. Data's key to unlocking policy. We did a report last year for the Federation of Small Businesses making some recommendations about the poor quality of data in the UK and what could be done to improve data quality. I'd be interested in your view on what action has actually been taken at UK level to provide those data insights to help drive policy formation and progress.
So poor quality of data, and please introduce
Thank you.
yourself.
Helene Martin-G, founder of Pink Shoe and the UK Economic Blueprint for Women. Thank you for a great insight. Now, as you're going off to meet with the Prime Minister shortly, perhaps you could ask her if she's able to join us at this event next year. I'm sure she'd have some great insights, and I know she's both passionate and proactive about females, gender, if we're allowed to use it, and entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant move, because I couldn't ask that question, but you did. This is a perfect way for you to finish in that case, Peter.
So
take on the data, and you've got instructions for when you leave the room.
So on data, I mean, it is a live issue in government right now about how do we best capture and articulate publicly data on a number of issues, gender being one of them, which are relevant to what the Prime Minister, when she came into office, termed the burning injustices, which have not left her, and of which data is one. And bizarrely enough, we have just, in the past few days, having a debate about how you improve the quality of the data in order to hold us to account. And I think what I hope will happen through the accelerator is that the more demands there are for better data, the more pressure there will be on us all in order to improve the quality of the data. I mean, I would say in our defence, I think when we compare ourselves internationally to others, I don't think we're too shoddy in terms of the quality of our data, but I know that there's more to do. In terms of the Prime Minister, I mean, in 3 weeks' time, I will no longer be responsible for the Prime Minister's diary. So I can't make any commitments, but I'm certainly accruing a number of requests that she's received for how she might spend her time when she's no longer so fully employed, and I will put that on her list.
Great. Please, a very strong hand for Peter. We've got to get him out to make that request. Thanks, Peter. We'll come see you. I'll walk out with you. Our Associate Fellow here to come up and chair the first session and where we are today and the year ahead. Mina, thank you very much for kicking off first.